And we're gonna take a hot hour today to talk about a few exciting topics in the carbon market. What we're basically gonna discuss today is first, how do you integrate carbon credits and carbon removal into your climate journey? Super excited to have some guests from VCMI here. And we're then going to take the next step and think about once you have gained an understanding how to effectively and successfully integrate carbon credits, what do you then have to look at in terms of risk in your portfolio? How can you optimize it? That should be covered by our own Carla Woydt. If we take one step back quickly, I think we look at exciting times in the market. We've seen the last year with probably relatively stable volumes, right? We didn't see a decline, but also maybe not the expected growth in the overall carbon markets. What we have seen, however, is an increase in the value that's being retired and traded. So we definitely see that there is a huge shift towards higher price and mostly also higher quality credits. I think that's very exciting. I think we see that large enterprises, many of our customers, of course, are really starting to plan ahead for net zero, trying to understand how can I get started? How do I also define that point in time when I should get started to start engaging in the market and to integrate carbon credits? Do I do it before net zero? Do I do it shortly before or a bit longer before? I think our understanding is, and also our opinion is to do it a bit ahead of time. And we're also going to discuss a bit what are like the implementation challenges, what are the challenges to get started directly. With that in mind, I'm very happy to introduce our amazing guests today. And I'm going to start off with our own Carla Woydt. Carla is Chief Impact Officer at CEEZER. She has a PhD in psychology and has worked in the field in the rainforest, where she gained a lot of experience with the on-ground work in protected environments. She's been leading the science and supply part, also the risk work that we do at CEEZER for our clients in the market. And she'll be covering the, let's say, the risk assessment part. Very, very happy to be joined by Aisha Rodriguez. Aisha is Manager for Markets and Standards at VCMI. So she's developing the Claims Code of Practice, one of the now already leading frameworks for how corporates can engage in the carbon markets and how they can use carbon credits with high integrity. And she's been also focused on developing frameworks for robust monitoring, reporting, and assurance. But also has been, working with her team on topics like how to engage in Scope 3 and how to find, good solutions. And finally, last but not least, Rafael Alonso. He's Engagement Manager in North America for VCMI. He works to nurture and develop the partnerships in the region with enterprises and helps really understand and enterprises understand how to engage with VCMI and how to make the best use of it. Very warm welcome to all of our wonderful panelists today. And we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to start right in, right? I think for many enterprises and people in companies trying to understand what role carbon credits can play, the first question is always like, what role can they play in my own climate journey? When is the time to use them? How can I kind of avoid maybe, things like greenwashing? And I think there's been a lot of debates also over the past weeks and months on maybe also a lack of standards, a lack of rules for enterprises. Maybe to kick it off, Aisha, you work on the Claims Code of Practice, but offers a relatively practical guide to like what's a good way to engage with carbon credits, how can they be part of the climate journey. Maybe if you want to kick us off, how did you come about this? How did the VCMI Claims Code of Practice come about? How did you leverage the different inputs who participated in developing that?
Sure, thanks, Magnus. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. If you are not familiar with the VCMI Claims Code of Practice, it is essentially guidance to corporates on when and how they can credibly make use of voluntary carbon credits as part of their robust, wider climate strategy. And so if our claims code of practice is accessible on our website, by the way, but just to kind of give you a bit of background in terms of how it's developed and to answer Magnus's question. So in 2022, we launched a provisional claims code of practice, or I'm going to call it claims code for short. And that was followed by, it was submitted to public consultation. And we received loads of feedback from that public consultation. We also conducted a corporate road testing with about 70 corporates. We engaged the VCMI country contact group, which consists of about 50 government representatives. We also have an expert advisory group. So these are sort of foundational stakeholder groups that we engage with. They act as our market sounding boards, but we also launched a stakeholder forum last year comprised of about 70 members of a diverse spectrum of sectors involved, including academia, consultancy, NGO, corporates, of course, as well as an early adopters program. So we have lots of different stakeholder engagement groups, and the provisional claims code essentially went through engagement and consultation with all these different stakeholder groups. We then took that the inputs from these groups, which gave us really a 360 view because they come from so many different backgrounds. We identified what the common threads were, and we processed that and reflected that in a follow-up version of the claims code, which was published in summer last year, in June last year. And these different stakeholder groups really bring all these different perspectives. You know, we have the technical inputs, we have from the technical experts, we balance it with insights on the state of the market from our experts that are, you know, very on the pulse with what's happening in the market. We have also been able to test the practicalities of the requirements in the claims code with companies through all of the different groups I mentioned, like the early adopters program, the stakeholder forum. And we've also been able, through our country contact group, consider the political implications with government representatives. So it's been through, the claims code has really been through a robust consultation process. And that's what you see today in the latest claims code.
Amazing. And I think, I mean, to maybe rephrase it a bit, I think the outcome is really like a very practical, I guess, and very kind of up-to-date view on how can you engage with the carbon markets for your decarbonization strategy. I think maybe also in comparison to some other standards out there, right? I think it's definitely timely, at least also like our observation, to make sure that that fits both the science part of the thing, but also businesses that have to engage in it. So if you wanna try to, there's truly a lot of documentation, a lot of pages about it, but like summing it up, what came out? You have 3 different levels. Maybe you can give us a quick overview of what that meant. Yeah.
Yes, and maybe to start off with, it's just a reminder that the claims, which we call the carbon integrity claims, and that's all outlined in the claims code, which is the standard that VCMI has created, is really to help companies that are going above and beyond, right? So what VCMI requires is for companies to use carbon credits as a tool to deliver climate mitigation that is additional to internal decarbonization. So what we have is a set of foundational criteria, which we know from the market, which we know is what the market considers best practice. So things that any good, responsible actor would be doing, such as transparently reporting on your greenhouse gas emissions footprint. You've got a science-aligned target for reducing emissions. You are setting the right strategy and governance processes to manage the decarbonization activities. And you have public policy advocacy activities that are aligned to the Paris Agreement. So these are our foundational criteria that companies have to meet before we then allow them to purchase high-quality carbon credits and make a claim. So Magnus, you mentioned the different levels. For those that are not familiar, we have the carbon integrity claims at 3 different levels: carbon integrity silver, gold, and platinum. And each of these claims requires the purchase and retirement of carbon credits proportionate to the company's remaining emissions. So let's say in 1 year you have 100 tons of remaining emissions. You want to apply for a silver claim, which is 10% to 50% of your inventory in that year. So you would be purchasing credits of the volume of 10 tons. And then by doing that and meeting all the foundational criteria and demonstrating that you're making progress to reaching your targets, you can make a carbon integrity silver claim. And the reason why we've have these different claims is we will be building on the provisional claims code and all the feedback we receive from public consultation and from the different stakeholder groups. But it also it recognizes the fact that companies have different abilities to pay and different ambition and at different points in their sustainability journey. But it sets the vision that the companies should aim for, whilst also incentivizing companies to increase ambition over time. So in an ideal situation, all companies that join at the silver level will progressively through the years go up to platinum.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think makes a lot of sense also with regards to the fact that, I think every company with a net zero commitment eventually will have to actually come to platinum in a way, right? Because we need to really take everything out that's left. I think that's often a fact that's not forgotten, but I think really low on the priority list, but that comes with a certain requirement to really start making that plan early. And I think we definitely also see in practice across the board, as you said, that different industries have different abilities, just financially speaking, but also from the emissions levels that they have by nature of their operations to engage. And I think, obviously you have different levels, which I think is good to not have a black and white view on it, but you can really start where you can start. But there's another thing that I think across the industries that we see coming back as a challenge, which is really scope 3, right? I think for most enterprises, scope 3, I think the average is like 70 to 80% of emissions actually happen outside of your own operations. That's your suppliers, upchain, but also, could be also downchain. So there's been a lot of discussions, obviously, around, what role can credits play as a probably more controllable way to remove carbon than getting all suppliers until the last year involved in decarbonization. So I think VCMI recently started to finish the consultation. Any news you can share? What's the current standpoint of VCMI? I think it's something everyone's really keen to learn.
Yeah, of course, happy to share some scope 3 updates. You're completely right. Obviously, scope 3 is a huge challenge for the majority of organizations, and this is really why VCMI has developed this scope 3 claim, which is what we're currently calling it. It may not be the final sort of terminology or name that we use in the end, but we've launched a beta version a few months ago. And as you mentioned, we've completed the public consultation on that beta version, and we received over 1,000 comments from stakeholders worldwide. We plan to transparently publish all of those comments. We're currently kind of processing all of that. We're putting together a summary, but we also want to transparently publish all of the comments that we received, and we plan to do that over the next few months. We also today have finalized our road testing phase with some leading companies. This is a sort of 4-week road test that we've been running. And it's been super crucial to evaluating the feasibility and the effectiveness of the methodology and the guardrails and the really technical things that are included within the beta version to help ensure that this claim that we create meets the needs of businesses whilst maintaining rigor and credibility. So now with all of this work, we're entering a critical review phase where we will integrate all of the insights from the public consultation and the road testing. We'll refine the scope 3 claim and then ensure that the final guidance is impactful and practical. And we aim to publish this scope 3 approach in early 2025. And the guidance will provide companies with a science-aligned, transparent framework for addressing their scope 3 emissions by using high-quality carbon credits as a complement to internal decarbonization efforts. That last part is really important to remember. It's not to replace critical internal decarbonization efforts, but as a complement and to help sort of accelerate us as a planet, as a society, getting to net zero faster.
That is exciting, but also sounds like a very busy holiday season for the folks at VCMI. But thanks for sharing that news. I think one of the topics that I think comes up in every conversation. So I think everyone's more than keen to hear, and great to hear that that's brewing and that we can look at this very soon. Great. Maybe shifting perspective a bit now. we have this coming up early next year. We have the VCMI claims code. Rafael, you're working in North America to kind of increase adoption. What are things that you felt work within companies? How can sustainability managers, people working on climate in companies, what are good ways for them to kind of use the claims code to also advance their own work to make sure that they get the support in their own organization? What have you seen working? What do you recommend?
Yeah, thank you, Magnus, and thank you for inviting us to share what we're seeing in the market, right? With all your companies that you work with and everybody else that is joining us today. I would say I am based and I'm focusing on the North American market, and we definitely start to see differences between North American companies and European ones and companies elsewhere. But really, across all companies, one thing that we see is that everybody wants to act with integrity, and by that I mean companies that are now coming into 2025, engaging actively into voluntary carbon markets. They do want to act in the best possible way out there. Now, what that looks for companies across geography sectors, it differs. And in reality is that we have different journeys to get to the next level of integrity, right? We at VCMI go by one of our principles, which is action. Action is better than inaction. And so in terms of your question, what is working with companies is really meeting them where they are, like being empathetic to the fact that they do have climate sustainability managers, TSOs. They have a very busy time as well, right? Complying with different reporting, doing their decarbonization journey, doing their carbon crediting due diligence. And so in addition of all of that, coming to comply with VCMI or to accept the suggestions that come in our claims code of practice is something that we strive to be as something that adds value to them rather than just adding more work, right? What adds value to companies, it really depends on sectors, on the maturity that they are. But generally speaking, is being able to showcase a lot of work that you're already doing as a company, not only in purchasing carbon credits, but as our claims code says, taking care of your decarbonization efforts year after year, communicating that, and then also making sure that your carbon credit purchases are done with integrity.
I agree. And I think the fact that I think both geographically companies are at a different journey, I think you could almost say the same for industries, right? I think some industries are naturally already way more ahead. Some are maybe just starting out. And I think it's important indeed to really meet them where they are. And I think, from maybe just to add a bit of perspective from our work, I think we do see that no matter where they are, I think there is a definite commitment and theme to make sure that if you start engaging or increasing your engagement, you want to make sure this is worthwhile and you do this with a maximum effect, both obviously for the climate first and foremost, but also for your company ultimately, right? That you can actually advance your organization. Maybe speaking a bit about like what hinders, what's in the way, like what do you see as barriers, or what are like typical things that you hear from companies engaging with VCMI as like entry barriers, doubts that they have, challenges that they have? Maybe you can share a bit what's happening in your view.
Yes, for sure. So we see, I would say the main barrier, going for barriers first, the main barrier that we see is lack of awareness of what integrity looks like, right? And honestly, we've seen a huge improvement from last year in the market in terms of integrity. And as you were saying, the type of what you're seeing in terms of the prices and the quality of carbon credits being transacted, we also see it on the sentiment of companies wanting to do their strategies based on more quality and more integrity. Now, companies come to us and say, well, how does that look like, right? There is, and this is not only VCMI's effort, this is a joint effort from different stakeholders across the board. So there is a lot of guidance already, but oftentimes being able to distill that to what the company needs today for their reporting needs today, or for their strategy as a whole, or for internal convincing, right? Within their own company decision-making boards. That's the main challenge, right? And that's something that VCMI is focusing actively now in 2025 on all this documentation that we have developed that has all the scientific rigor, making it more accessible and more relevant for companies. This is particularly important or more difficult as a barrier with two things. One is that the market is changing constantly, right? So we just heard some very exciting news at COP29 that will transform markets and how it relates to your corporate purchases to what governments are doing. Just to put one example that happened in the past month, right? So with a market that is still maturing and still being developing, and in a way, it's being improved, I would say month on month. There is even more need to have this type of guidance and yeah, like an authority that says this is what we believe is the best way to purchase carbon credits, right? But the other factor that makes these barriers even more nuanced is that everything changes by geography and by sector, right? So some sectors have guidance from years ago, like the international aviation sector with CORSIA, and some others are starting to develop. Some companies, we're seeing companies in certain sectors working together to figure out and sharing knowledge. Some other sectors not so much, right? And similarly, geography-wise, with relationship to existing and upcoming regulation. And so I would say that is a main barrier that not only VCMI, but a group of organizations is coming together to solve. Now, in terms of challenges, in terms of opportunities, that's where it comes very exciting. I think right now is an exciting time for carbon markets, more than ever. Yes, like any market, there is, in terms of volumes, contractions and expansions, and that is just part of normal market behavior. As we are moving into 2025, the market is being solidified, but then for companies to want to engage with carbon integrity claims in particular, or generally speaking with good integrity practices, there is still a big opportunity to be an early adopter, to be a first mover in your sector, in your geography, and reap the benefits of taking the lead, right? So not only showing what you're already doing well in your whole climate strategy, and not only doing like your part to support global net zero, but also getting the reputational benefits and the leadership benefits. And so, for example, one company, a Brazilian company, Natura, that earlier this year made a carbon integrity platinum claim, now is seen by their customers, by their investors, by the general, their peers and competitors, and the general corporate world as the Brazilian company that stepped forward, that took action. This comes very handy for them as we start thinking of COP30 happening in Brazil, right? And so being able to reap these benefits and tie the knots in a way that is relevant to your company's strategy beyond your climate strategy is one huge benefit that companies can do by using carbon integrity claims.
Amazing, yeah. And I think we definitely see both of this, I think also practically speaking, right? I think we see a lot of collaboration now happening. I think we introduced, I don't know if you know, like on CEEZER, we introduced the ability to onboard suppliers onto your own portfolio so they can contribute to that, right? You can share data, you can work with portfolio company and subsidiaries. And I think there's definitely an interesting development where maybe, entities that would traditionally not have worked together are actually starting to really successfully collaborate on these things, which ultimately also helps with risk. Any other you already shared a few, but any other things where you feel like, hey, this is how enterprises today can move a bit beyond traditional approaches? So we talked about collaboration. Any other trends that you're seeing, things that are exciting to your book?
Yes, and so again, the market is maturing, is moving to where we want the market to be, right? More integrity, more players, more interactions. What you mentioned just now is very important, right? Being able to not work in isolation, but also bring different stakeholders and play at your own strengths, right? So data, the beauty of data is that it can benefit companies, like as a user, it can benefit you as a company, but it can also, that same data, help your investor obtain the data that they need to put you in part of a portfolio or to keep showcasing you. It helps your customers also. And so that I would say being able to collaborate with everybody and just work once and do a lot of benefit for many stakeholders, it's something that I just see happening more and more often as we go into the near future. Another thing that is happening in terms of moving away from traditional approaches is that, yeah, the market at the beginning was purchasing carbon credits without really understanding what was the reason to purchase credits, right? And so some companies were doing just pure offsetting, some companies were doing something else, insetting was starting, and there was some media coverage, right, on how, and fairly so, on how using these markets in a way that is not necessarily the best can have negative consequences. Now, as we go into the future, and that is part really embedded in the claims code of practice, which is our cornerstone on where to start before moving into higher integrity solutions like the carbon integrity claims, we're thinking about, and we're stating it as companies doing their fair part to accelerate global net zero, right? So this is not like, basically what we try to convey, and our vision for the market is that players come in to use carbon credits as one of many tools available for supporting global net zero, but not as a substitute of their own decarbonization journey. And so being able to show that and purchasing credits not particularly for offsetting purposes, and certainly blinding yourselves against potential greenwashing accusations or potential issues on saying, well, are you just paying to pollute, right? Which some critics have had in the past. By following the claims code of practice, you ensure that you don't fall into that. But if anything, you're supporting global net zero, you're doing your part, you're not waiting until 2050 or 2049 to start doing something extra, but also you're able to show that you're doing your decarbonization journey and that the credits that you're purchasing are high quality and they have co-benefits and good impact on the world, in addition to already you doing everything that you need to do today.
That's very, very good points. And I think I think from our observation, right, we couldn't agree more. I think there's always, I think, a bit almost like the historical notion that you just pay off. And I think maybe historically some companies have done it. I think today we see that it's hard to win with that strategy, I would almost say, right? I think the market has really evolved. I think it's almost impossible to, I want to say, get away with it if you don't do the work internally. That said, I think for many, it is important to start investing early also in other means and beyond value chain mitigation, both because you have huge risk in your own decarbonization journey. I think we often hear and see that the plans don't work out as promised, that emissions stay higher, right? And the one thing that cannot wait is our planet. So it's one thing is reporting to investors that you're late, but the other thing is really that the amount of CO2 just keeps rising still. So we almost have to make sure that we find these ways to use removal where possible and other measures to kind of get down as quickly as possible. I want to switch gears a bit. I'm going to pick on your point on data, which would have been a perfect segue, Rafael, to Carla. And you just mentioned, right, there's data is the beauty. I think, Carla, you will probably know all about it. That's a lot of the work that you do. And Rafael, you also just mentioned, you have to make sure not only that what you do with carbon credits fits into your overall journey, and you do all the other things that you have to do, obviously, to get to that point. But then once you get the decision of engaging with the VCM, the next big challenge comes. So after you've dove through all the guidance out there on when and how to use carbon credits, you then suddenly are faced with a selection problem, which is how do you actually find a good portfolio? And the question of risk comes in, right? Like there's a lot of different risk profiles, a lot of different kinds of credits in the market. So Carla, maybe enlighten us. What's your view? What is your work on CEEZER? How do you look at risk, and how would you try to define and quantify risk in the carbon credit space for buyers?
Yeah, thanks very much, Magnus. Yeah, exactly. So I would probably like to start a little bit on the other end. So we talked about claims, we talked about portfolio targets. So why would you at all create a portfolio? What is your target that you wanna reach with a portfolio? And I think it is absolutely valuable to have those kind of frameworks that help you guide a little bit to define your strategy when it comes to claiming, the ICVCM when it comes to integrity. But what I think is an additional layer, and this is where we support with, is really to go down to data points for every single project, right? So what are the high or kind of the important risks in the voluntary carbon market when creating a portfolio? We have a very holistic view on risk. So we talked a lot about, or the VCMI and the ICVCM, they look a lot at quality risk, and this is something that we're also looking at. So every project or every project category has its own inherent risk profile. That's on the category level with respect to quality risk. But then there is even one level deeper, because within every single credit category, there are specific risks for every single project based on, and this was already mentioned, geography, but also on the project developers. Some of the risks when we look at delivery risk are also coming from the project developer. So we take a holistic market approach to risk. We not only look at carbon credit quality risk, but we also integrate the host country risk, the delivery risk, and the price risk. And the price risk is the question, what has actually happened to the prices in the future, and what are the different offtakes or offtake options you should engage in? And then within every single category, of course, we look at the data level. So every single category has specific data points, again, very, very individual to certain project qualities that define the overall risk profile of a certain project.
Very cool. So, I mean, obviously a lot of data to like look at, right? And I think, especially for buyers that are just entering the market, not always easy. You mentioned a bit the topic, and I think that's a trend that we've been seeing. I think also in the pre-discussion we briefly touched base, Rafael, on that. That there's a bit of a trend towards a more long-term planning, right? We see a bit of a plan of companies that have engaged, that have a certain claims code out there, or like a certain commitment out there, that they're starting to secure that supply for longer and trying to like come to a more long-term strategy with what that portfolio might look like. And I think we particularly see that in, let's say, technical removal and CDR, right? Considered probably the most long-term solution. How do you look at this? Often very new technologies with very high risk. How do you help buyers understand and take decisions on engaging in those categories that are probably the most permanent, but also the most risky?
Absolutely. And there are again two ends of it. One is the individual risk profile or the risk appetite of a buyer. And then there are the risks attached to every single project and project type, but also the opportunities, right? And the impact. So our recommendation is always to balance the impact and the risk. And you mentioned more nascent CDR technologies. They often come with a higher delivery risk because they are just less mature than other more traditional project types or categories in the voluntary carbon market. But they also provide the opportunity to scale a nascent market and to really help provide access at scale when many of the companies that are in the market and that we are talking to as well really need it, which is at their net zero target years that are coming in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, but also 15 years, right? So we see there is an increase in net zero target years. And at the very latest, at your net zero target year, you will, by definition, almost need carbon removal. And many of the standards, although we also said that guidance is missing, are clearly flagging that at net zero, to abate or kind of to neutralize your residual emissions, you would need durable carbon removal. But it's not only true for nascent CDR technologies, this is also true for nature-based solutions. So we see that there's currently really already a shortage of high quality nature-based removal. So this is also a project type where we see it is actually worth already now engaging in longer term offtakes, not only because there is a scarcity and the scarcity is going to grow, but also the prices are going to develop in a way that are actually not beneficial for buyers, because we see that there will be price increases, and these price increases are going to grow with the net zero target years and the demand approaching.
Yeah, that's definitely a risk. Maybe you can help a bit out. Like, you're a buyer, you're starting out, you have a multi-year target in front of you. Like, how do you look at balancing those risks? You mentioned portfolio building. Like, what does it look like in practice? Like, how can you make it the best possible way for you?
So first, I think you should draft your own specific purchasing strategy based on data. Be clear of what are the risks. Every single project in the voluntary carbon market comes with a risk. There is no project without any risk. And this is something you have to be aware of. And then you have to start drafting a very clear purchasing strategy. So what are the risks you are accepting, and what can you do to mitigate the risks as much as possible? These are the two things you have to know. And then we recommend to build a diverse portfolio. So we very often orientate ourselves on the Oxford principles. So to start with an Oxford blend at the beginning, and then to increase the share of removal over time, making sure that you have a removal-only portfolio at net zero. And then once you have that strategy mapped out, you have to define, okay, what are the different offtake types I want to engage in? So which of the project types in my portfolio have a higher delivery risk, but also have a volume and price risk? And for those where we would predict a scarcity in the future and also price increase, we would highly recommend to look into long-term offtakes, while there are other project types such as energy efficiency, let's say, or avoided deforestation. Those credits on the avoidance end are readily available at the moment. So there is actually not a real need to engage in long-term offtakes. And also there are no clear indications that these prices are going to increase. It's quite the contrary that we saw in the past year. Actually, the prices for avoidance credits were decreasing.
Definitely, yeah. I think we saw a 4% decrease actually over the last 12 months for avoidance credits, while removal was across the board by over 15%, I think, so quite significant. But Raf mentioned something else, which is it's a quickly evolving market, right? So doing a long-term offtake at the same time, rules are changing. Rafael, you mentioned the COP decision on Article 6.4. Maybe, Carla, how do you deal with it? What does your team do? How do you help buyers to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, good question. So we, of course, look also at the regulatory landscape in a country. So we already discussed the host country risk or the geographic differences in carbon trading regulations, but also the cost and the barriers to develop and sell carbon credits. So this is something that we are monitoring in a carbon portfolio. And then on top of that, we always integrate upcoming international frameworks, right, and developments. This is something where we work closely with our scientific advisory board. We have a team in-house that is focusing on policy developments. So we predict those changes and make sure that we label this in the credits. So we have a lot of buyers that are very interested in how their portfolio is going to evolve. So we are not only constantly monitoring what is happening to the portfolio now, but also we kind of model what could happen to credits and what are developments that we're already foreseeing and that will happen in the coming 1, 2, or 3 years.
Yeah, and appreciating Aisha's question, I think SCVCM also recently approved RED methodologies, right? I think counting to avoidance can still play obviously a huge role in helping mitigate emissions. Yeah, what do you observe? What's your view, Carla? Maybe you can start it. Yeah.
So we see that there is a push to removal, that we see high demand for nature-based removal and a growing interest into technological removal, durable removal technologies. But and this is something that we promote also with engaging in diverse portfolios, there is a high impact in funding the protection of nature as well, right? And this is currently dramatically underfunded, and that, from our point of view, is an absolute valid part in a carbon credit portfolio. If a buyer decides to only engage in carbon removal, I think this is an absolute fair decision. But here again, there are some risks attached to engaging in carbon removal portfolios only, and buyers just have to be aware that these risks exist, and then they have the chance to kind of deal with the risks and mitigate them as much as possible, looking at delivery risk, for instance, with adding a buffer on top of the portfolio, or already defining suitable replacement credits, or they can mix a certain share, and it might be a minor share of removal credits for now, for the time being, until net zero, phasing it out over time, of avoidance credits, and making thereby sure to also fund and invest nature protection and biodiversity.
Maybe, and last question to you then, Carla. I mean, you talked about, all these risk mitigation measures. I mean, practically, like, what is the typical process to set up a portfolio? If you look in the longer term, like, what are some of the considerations for buyers to make now, and what are some of the things you might have a bit more leeway in time with?
Yes, I already said that it is very important to have a clear strategy in place, and this strategy defines what you have to log in now and where you can be more flexible. And here again, it makes sense to work with experts in the market to draft out, or kind of to get the insights of what is going to happen. So there, we recommend that you fix a certain share of your portfolio, especially for project types where we see there is a shortage, and especially for project types where we see we need them to scale in order to have them readily available at that scale needed in the net zero years. So this should be fixed. But then there is a variable part of the portfolio that can actually be complemented on a year-on-year basis. And this is a bit based on, again, your appetite to, or your averseness to risk, because that means that this part of the portfolio might not stay stable over the years, which is actually great, because this helps you to also react to market changes and fill up your portfolio with credits that are aligned with the current changes in the market. And I think it's a very good strategy to have a fixed part of the portfolio, making sure that this is the base part of your portfolio. And this should make up at around 50% of your portfolio, while the rest can be filled up when the years are coming, and also with new projects coming online, new technologies, but also new methodologies or updates of methodologies in the market that align with new frameworks.
Thank you. Amazing. I think we promised to save some time for questions, and we received some. So I'm gonna shift gears again, and let's go a bit into Q&A mode. So starting off with Carla, just on your point on managing prices, risks, how does that factor in? How do you see that? What's a good way to find a balance? How do you see buyers actually evaluate price versus risk today?
A good way to evaluate price is to look at historic developments of projects, and then price projections in the future. So how are prices going to develop? And there are several factors that come into play. One is what are the demand projections now? What are the demand projections in the coming years? But also, what is the availability of a certain project? So what is the issuance cadence of a project that I'm interested in? So how abundant is the supply in the market? And what are the patterns of issuance and retirement? So we see many projects that are more or less liquid in the market, which means that they might issue every 2 years, but then we see that the new issuance is being sold out very quickly. And for those projects, it just makes sense to engage in at an earlier stage. And for those projects, we also see that prices are increasing. While other projects that issue large amounts on a yearly basis, and where retirements are lower than the issuance, of course, those prices are not going to increase as much, and might even be decreasing, because there's just enough supply in the market. Another thing is upcoming frameworks. You already mentioned it. Might be at some point Article six eligibility, it might be CCP labels. All of those also define what the price will be. And we already see that projects with a CCP label are increasing in price, are under high demand. And even project types that were kind of less attractive to buyers before the CCP labels, now we see picking up really also in our portfolios. And that's a development that everyone has to factor in when building a portfolio. So how is the demand? How is the availability? But also what is going to happen in terms of frameworks and labels for eligibility even for certain projects and project types.
Yeah, and I think just because it fits well to that point, if you look at ex ante credits and then ex post credits, how do risks differ? Like what is important to keep in mind when you look at these different tools? For those that don't know, ex ante credits are credits that are issued before the carbon impact and climate impact has been fully verified and registered. Ex post credits, that's what the majority of the market is, are credits that are issued only after the full verification of the carbon impact has happened and the carbon impact has happened.
Yeah, I think there are very specific risks that are more prominent with ex ante credits. One is, for instance, the natural risk. So when we look at nature-based solutions, one very concrete example is if you have an ex ante or ex post credit, nature-based removal credit or avoided deforestation credit, for instance, you know that the carbon impact has already been verified. So every natural disaster or natural risk that happens to the project or to the project area will happen to next issuances that are not yet ex post verified. However, if you have an ex ante issued credit, this might not be the case. So you might buy and use one of the credits for your accounting that will still needs to be verified. And if something then happens to the project area, if there is a wildfire, for instance, then it might be that the carbon sequestration or the impact cannot be verified anymore because it will happen after you bought it, right? And that is a huge risk. And this also comes with an increased delivery risk. And then this again becomes very, very important when you want to do a claim such as the VCMI claim, where you not only have to plan your carbon accounting, or when do you account for the carbon credits that you buy for every portfolio, but you also have to take into consideration when you get those credits delivered and when you can retire those credits, because you can only claim for many frameworks after retirement, so after you have invalidated the credits. And there, of course, the ex ante issuance comes with a much higher risk as compared to the ex post credits.
Right, and I think we're going to pick a bit on when to retire and when to report on those retirements in a second. But up front, I think we had one question to Rafael, and I think probably good to give the audience a bit of an idea, like how far did VCMI come? How widespread is it? Like, do you have any indication, like how many companies subscribe to VCMI in North America, but maybe also globally? Like, how do you see that taking shape?
Yes, definitely. So I would say our North American success case that made a platinum claim is BCG, Boston Consulting Group. Bain and Company. Bain and Company, the consulting company that has shown that it has gone significantly above and beyond. Right. We are speaking to many other companies like. Pretty much every company in that is also in the same industry as Bain and Company. A lot of technology companies, consumer companies. This is in the North American side of things, right? To make a carbon integrity claim. Now, VCMI speaks with different companies at different levels, right? So those companies that make carbon integrity claims, whether it is silver, gold, or platinum, are, as mentioned, the success stories, the success cases that we want to showcase across the planet. Now, we are also engaging with, and we have engaged with hundreds of companies in different other ways, right? So whether it is, for example, specific to North America, inviting them to an event that we ran in September during New York Climate Week, where we brought many different companies and actually governments from the US, from the world, to talk about high integrity markets. That's one way to engage. Another one, for example, with financial institutions, we do have a working group where we are speaking with many financial institutions. That is also quite relevant for North American, for the US and actually Canadian FIs that have been involved. But yeah, I would say like globally and looking at it, our engagement goes beyond only the companies that make carbon integrity claims, but also companies that are using our core claims code of practice guidance, and also companies that are engaging with us on a weekly basis that are keen to hear more about what our guidance is, but probably not yet ready to make a claim, or that will make it maybe next year or the year after.
Yeah, and I think definitely those things also take time, right? I think it's natural to like have a lot of conversations up front until the actual claims are made. We got some questions around the reporting side of things, right? I think something that's often top of mind for many people working in sustainability teams. So Aisha, how does VCMI sync to like the normal reporting? Is that completely separate? Is there regular things you have to do to maintain your label? Does that sync with reporting cycles and enterprises? Maybe you can give us some insights.
Yeah, for sure. All of this is, by the way, detailed in the monitoring, reporting, and assurance framework that VCMI has available on our website. And we've designed the carbon integrity claims as annual claims. So the claims are based on data from the latest financial year. So if you have a calendar year, financial years, so let's say 2023, you can apply today to make a claim based on the 2023 data and your inventory and everything. We have set up a reporting platform where companies have to log on and answer, provide responses to lots of different questions, which align to the metrics outlined in the monitoring, reporting, and assurance framework. But it's all pretty common information that a company would be reporting anyway in their annual sustainability report or their CDP reports, etc., GRI reports. Because when we designed the MRA framework, the monitoring, reporting, and assurance framework, we looked at what are the common metrics that companies report against these different frameworks, both mandatory and voluntary frameworks. We looked at ISSB, for example, as well, TCFD. And then we used those. We ensured that we're not asking for too much of companies. We're not looking to add to the reporting burden of companies. So we're saying you can use the same responses that you're providing to, let's say, CDP, GRI, whatever, and input that into the VCMI reporting platform to make a claim. In terms of providing evidence as well, VCMI, one of the key principles at VCMI is radical transparency. So we require all of this information that companies provide to VCMI to also be in the public domain. And that can be through your annual sustainability reports, CDP reports, web pages, etc. And you can use that as proof or evidence that you meet the requirements of VCMI's public disclosure requirements. So that's all on the reporting platform. And hopefully it's clear on the MRA framework. We also have a help desk and lots of tools and resources on our website to help companies understand exactly what are the reporting and assurance requirements. Actually, assurance is a one worth mentioning. So to make a VCMI claim, companies have to get their scope 1 and 2 emissions assured by an independent third party. That's pretty much common practice for a lot of leading organizations. And hopefully it's something that you guys on the call, if you're a corporate, already thinking about, if you're not doing that already. And so the reporting to VCMI would come after your usual annual reporting and assurance cycle. And we open the sort of questionnaire on our reporting platform for an extensive period of time after that usual reporting cycle, so that companies can apply to make a VCMI claim. I also just wanted to jump in here because Carla gave some really great insights, and thank you so much, Carla, for your knowledge and input. There's lots of conversations around different carbon credit types and quality thresholds, etc. Carbon credit categories, activity types, etc. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that VCMI is agnostic on the type of credits that companies want to use to make a claim. So if it's removal or reductions or avoidance, that's fine. What we base our quality benchmark on is essentially ICVCM's assessments and the CCPs. However, we acknowledge that the CCPs are only scaling up in the market now. There's not much volume of that and supply of that in the market. So we are saying before January 1st, 2026, there are 2 interim solutions available to companies if they want to make a VCMI claim. The first one is to purchase credits that are CORSIA eligible units from the first phase or pilot phase. The second one, which is the option that the companies that have made carbon integrity claims to date have used, which is to disclose transparently and publicly their due diligence for carbon credits and how that aligns to all 10 of the core carbon principles, the ICVCM CCPs. And I think that's good practice anyway, going into the future, is to be radically transparent. And in my view, it's really how a company would combat scrutiny on their carbon credit procurements, is to be transparent about how do they assess for quality, how do they align to these key principles. And so, yeah, those are the 2 options that companies can use leading up to Jan 2026. Come Jan 2026 to make a VCMI claim, we're saying all credits have to be CCP approved. So I thought that was worth mentioning here.
Definitely very good guidance. Yeah, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you, Magnus. And if I may, following the radical transparency, I see a follow-up question from Jose Restrepo. And so, yeah, thank you, because that helps clarify what the question was. And so just to give an example, right? One of these groups that we engage with companies is the early adopters group. These were 14 companies that were very involved with us in developing the carbon integrity claim and are still involved in different ways. Now, I do agree with you that generally speaking, European companies seem to be more proactive than North American companies, generally speaking. Now, in this group, it's interesting because looking at the statistics, 50%, so half of these companies are based in the US. Now, these are companies that do have business in Europe as well. These are global companies, but half of them are based in the US, 35% in UK and Europe, and only 15% elsewhere. So we do see activity across the world. Whether that activity translates into actually making a carbon integrity claim, into consecutively going 1 year after another in making claims, like some companies have started to do that. It's still time will tell, right? And as Magnus was saying, there is a lot of different implications and slow processes, internal, external, that companies go through. But we are seeing that there is interest in both sides of the ocean, North America and Europe, and some interest too in other geographies. Definitely not as much as in the US and in UK, Europe.
Great. I unfortunately have to make a cut. Our time is coming to an end. Aisha, Rafael, Carla, thank you so much for joining, and thanks for everyone on the call for dialing in. I just want to encourage you to look at our website. There's a great white paper by Carla's team on how to assess risk. There's also news on how you can report. So CEEZER supports reporting not only for VCMI, but also for VCMDA, all the other global reporting standards, so that can be fairly easy. Also do follow VCMI. I think we're all excited for the update in Jan on Scope 3, but also do take a look at their website and follow on LinkedIn to make sure you stay tuned. As we said, it's a super fast moving market, so it's really good to kind of stay ahead and try to get the latest. Thanks so much. I hope you all have a great evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And yeah, see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.